Welcome everyone to Amy Kennedy's defense. As Amy said, but while we're getting ready, you have 25 minutes to present. Then we're going to do rounds of questions. And then for everyone that's in viewing, we're going to move you to another room while we deliberate and then bring you back at the end. So please be around to click some buttons at the end of the session to move around. And Amy, you have 25 minutes. It's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Dave. My heart's just pounding. So
It's all
as
good.
Dave mentioned, I'm Amy Kennedy. I'm joining you today from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. I want to acknowledge that I'm on Chief Dragi's territory, and I'm grateful to be on this land. I respect the histories, languages, and cultures of all Indigenous people who have called these ancestral lands their home, including Métis, First Nation, and Inuit people. So I have been a public servant working in the communication and policy space for over 20 years, and I'm proud of being a public servant. I try to remember every day that my job is, in fact, to serve the public. So it's from this perspective and with this background that I selected the topic of my research. So my work is titled Public Relations for the Public Good, Integrating Two-Way Communication into Government Policymaking. So let's examine a few stats from the most recent Edelman Trust Barometer to frame our conversation today. They're fairly stark and suggest that we're facing a significant trust crisis in governance in Canada and worldwide. As you can see here, globally, the percentage of people who worry that government leaders lie to them has increased dramatically from 58% in 2021 to 69% in 2025. In Canada specifically, trust in government has steadily declined from 59% to just 50% over the last 5 years. Only 47% of people globally trust the government to do what is right. However, looking at this final stat in the bottom right might give us reason to hope. Among those with grievances against the government, 63% believe that government could regain legitimacy through better understanding and responsiveness to citizen needs. What does that mean, though? I think it means that we as governments and public servants need to do a better job of listening to and understanding citizen needs and then building programs and services and policies that actually address those needs. It should be easy, right? The question, though, of how to do that, to bridge the ever-expanding gap between citizens and governments, is at the root of this research project. So the statistics we just reviewed indicate that democracies are facing a profound legitimacy challenge. Citizens increasingly feel their voices aren't genuinely heard or incorporated into policy decisions that affect their lives. This matters enormously when we consider the complex challenges governments must address today. Climate change, housing availability and affordability, public health crises, homelessness, addiction, these wicked problems cannot be solved through top-down approaches alone. They demand solutions that draw on and incorporate diverse stakeholder perspectives. However, it seems, based on the statistics we just reviewed, that our current governance models are failing to create meaningful opportunities for this kind of collaborative engagement. My research is meant to support a conversation about how and whether public relations, when used strategically rather than tactically, can help bridge this gap between governments and citizens, potentially enhancing both policy outcomes and trust in government. So my research employed a sequential explanatory mixed methods design, which allowed me to explore how and to what extent the public relations and communications function is integrated into the policymaking process within Canadian government institutions. The study began with a comprehensive literature review that established the project's theoretical foundations. I distributed over 10,000 email invitations to government PR practitioners and policy professionals across Canada to collect the necessary quantitative data. This process yielded 112 complete survey responses. The survey data helped me identify key patterns and themes, which I then explored more deeply through qualitative interviews. 15 survey respondents participated in semi-structured interviews. 7 of these were PR practitioners and 8 were policy professionals. So at the core of my literature review, and in fact at the core of this project, is the idea of public relations as a democratic practice. In 1960, Dewey warned us that no government by experts in which the masses do not have the chance to inform the experts as to their needs can be anything but an oligarchy. Very practically speaking, this means that a government cannot operate as a democracy unless its decisions are informed by the people. And Dewey uses the term the masses, implying that as many people as possible, not just interest groups or cronies, need to be doing that informing. The question then becomes, how do we facilitate the informing of the experts by the masses? What is the mechanism or function by which we enable an efficient and informative exchange of information between the two? I am proposing that the answer to that question is through a strategically focused public relations function that is well integrated into the policymaking process. So as part of my literature review, I explored the operating frameworks that shape the structure and function of public governments and how they impact PR practice. New public management, or NPM, emerged in the 70s as a management approach to the public sector that responded to perceived bureaucratic inefficiencies. It introduced private sector principles to the operation of government organizations. The literature reveals how NPM's emphasis on efficiency, marketization, and disaggregation created these organizational structures that marginalized PR's strategic potential. NPM's customer service orientation and siloed departmental structures fundamentally conflict with PR principles that emphasize relationship building and stakeholder engagement. These NPM influence structures often position PR as a tactical support function rather than a strategic management component. In response to the limitations of NPM as a management approach, new public governance, or NPG, is emerging as a more suitable framework for government operation and organization, more conducive to strategic PR integration. NPG reconceptualizes the public sector from service provider to platform for co-creation, emphasizing collaboration, substantive citizen engagement, and relationship building that are essential for addressing the complex societal challenges governments are being asked to solve. This evolution aligns with PR theory's emphasis on building long-term relationships with strategic publics. Under NPG, public servants, including PR practitioners, and maybe especially PR practitioners, become connectors and navigators, helping to shift policy processes in a more open, transparent, and participatory direction. So given this context, and in order to better understand how it is that PR can act as the bridge between the governors and the governed, the public and the public service, I reviewed two core public relations theories. First was excellence theory, which describes several crucial elements of a strategic and effective PR function, including two-way symmetrical communication, emphasizing dialogue over one-way messaging, public relations as a strategic management function, integrated across the organization, and representation of public relations within the dominant coalition, ensuring its influence during decision-making. The second theory is relationship management theory, which focuses on how to build and maintain mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. This theory emphasizes trust, openness, involvement, investment, and commitment as the core components of organizational action that determine whether the relationship between a government and its citizens will be successful and sustainable over time. The effective application of these theories in a government setting enables PR practitioners to serve as strategic advisors who not only foster meaningful dialogue and build long-term relationships with citizens, but also integrate public input throughout the policymaking process, ultimately strengthening the democratic legitimacy of government institutions. And finally, because we're talking about policy development, I needed to adopt a model for describing this process, so I adopted this four-stage model. While policy development rarely follows this type of step-by-step path in practice, and there are a variety of more complex models available, this one provided a relatively simple and straightforward way to understand the process and a useful structure for analyzing how and where PR practitioners can most strategically contribute. This model describes four stages. The first is agenda setting, where issues are identified and prioritized for government attention or action. Next, in the formulation stage, potential solutions are developed and refined. Implementation involves putting policies into action through programs, regulations, or services. And then finally, evaluation examines policy outcomes and impacts, providing insights that feed back into future policy development or iterations on existing policy. So the rest of this presentation is me describing four high-level findings of my work. Each finding is connected to one of my research questions. My fifth research question asked whether there are differences in the level of integration between public relations and public policy development across the different levels of government. The information collected to respond to that question informed and provided context for each of the key findings we'll discuss today, but is not discussed on its own as a part of this presentation. I won't have time today to highlight where I found similarities and where differences emerged in relation to government level. However, this is covered in great detail in my paper, and if you're interested in this part of my research, I'd be happy to share it with you. Along that same vein, what I'm presenting today represents just really the tip of the iceberg. Each of these high-level findings contains numerous detailed discoveries and nuanced insights. The richness and complexity of the data collected during this research has yielded a wealth of information that extends far beyond what we have time to explore today. My full paper contains extensive analysis of these more granular findings, but I've had to be quite selective about what is included in today's presentation. So that said, let's talk about what I found. So my first major finding is what I call the implementation trap, a systemic pattern where PR practitioners are sidelined during the critical early stages of policy development. Through both survey data and interviews, I discovered that governments predominantly view public relations through a marketing lens as a tool to sell already finalized policies rather than as a strategic function that could help shape those policies from the outset. This marketing mindset has profound consequences. When PR is reduced to promotion and message crafting, governments lose its capacity to identify stakeholder concerns early, facilitate meaningful public engagement, and build relationships between citizens and government. Let's look at the evidence that demonstrates this pattern. So this visualization starkly illustrates how PR practitioners are systemically excluded from policy development until the implementation stage. In agenda setting, only 22% of PR practitioners report high involvement compared to 57% of policy professionals. This gap widens dramatically during formulation, the stage where policies are actually designed, with 83% of policy professionals reporting high involvement versus just 25% of PR practitioners. Implementation is the only stage where PR practitioners show stronger engagement than policy teams, with 61% reporting high involvement. This is precisely when the focus shifts from policy substance to messaging and public communication. By the time we get to evaluation, PR involvement drops sharply again to just 11% compared to 36% for policy professionals. This data shows that PR is systematically trapped in an implementation role, brought in to communicate about policies after decisions have been made, but excluded from the strategic stages where their expertise in public needs and relationship management would add the most value. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of PR's potential contribution to democratic governance and reinforces its devaluation within the public sector. Also, important to note that this pattern was consistent across different government departments and levels, suggesting that this is a systemic issue rather than a circumstantial one. My second finding reveals what I call the theory-practice paradox, a systemic disconnect between theoretical knowledge and practical application of PR principles in government settings. So the data from both my survey and interviews reveals a pattern I've termed atheoretical engagement, where stakeholder communication practices are deployed without the theoretical foundations that would maximize their strategic value. This manifests in two distinct ways. PR practitioners possess sophisticated theoretical knowledge they rarely get to apply in organizational settings, while policy professionals actively engage stakeholders without grounding in relationship management theories that should guide these interactions. Let's examine the evidence for this finding. So these charts visualize the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application across 5 key PR theories. This data comes from my survey, where respondents rated their familiarity with each theory on a 5-point scale from not at all familiar to extremely familiar, and separately rated how extensively these theories were applied in their organization, from not at all to a very great extent. So looking at PR practitioners on the left, we see a consistent pattern where theoretical familiarity in green exceeds practical application in blue across all theories. For policy professionals on the right, we see an intriguing inverse relationship in several areas where application rates exceed familiarity levels. For example, with two-way communication, policy professionals report higher application than familiarity, suggesting they're implementing practices without a theoretical understanding or grounding of in why. My interviews validated these patterns. PR practitioners described sophisticated theoretical understanding, but limited opportunities to apply that understanding strategically, while policy professionals described engagement activities that resembled one-way or asymmetrical models, often lacking the reciprocity and mutual benefit that a more thorough understanding of two-way symmetrical communication and relationship management theory would bring. My third finding reveals what I call the integration barrier, a disconnect between the appearance and reality of collaboration between PR and policy teams. While my research found numerous formal structures like cross-functional teams and regular meetings, these mechanisms create superficial integration without embedding PR strategically into policy work. What's particularly telling is that the mechanisms that would truly institutionalize collaboration, like shared performance metrics or joint training programs, are extremely rare. My data suggests that meaningful integration depends less on creating formal structures and more on building organizational cultures that value communication expertise throughout the policy process, not just when it's time to sell decisions. So looking at the chart on the left, we see the self-reported frequency of collaboration reported by PR and policy folks. PR practitioners report polarized engagement patterns, with 27.8% reporting daily collaboration and 19.4% reporting rare or no interaction at all. Policy professionals report more consistent but less collaboration, reporting that they experience collaboration primarily on a monthly or weekly basis. The chart on the right tells us what kinds of collaboration mechanisms actually work versus what's commonly practiced by survey respondents. We see that regular joint meetings show the strongest correlation with frequent collaboration at 0.502, yet only exist in 32% of organizations. Even more telling, joint training programs have the third strongest correlation with effective collaboration at 0.319, but are implemented by just 4.5% of organizations. Meanwhile, formal liaison roles used by 27.7% of organizations actually show a negative correlation with frequent collaboration at negative 0.026. This suggests that designated positions may in fact reinforce divisions rather than bridge them within organizations. Cross-functional teams are the most commonly used mechanism, with 33.9% of respondents reporting their use, but show only moderate correlation with collaboration frequency at 0.279. This disconnect between prevalence and impact demonstrates how organizations create structures that look good on paper, but fail to drive meaningful integration. This data clearly shows that the path to effective integration isn't through more formal structures, but through regular interactive practices that build shared understanding and embed communications expertise throughout the policy process. This slide captures the heart of the integration barrier by contrasting what survey respondents believe prevents effective collaboration against what they believe actually enables it. On the left, we see the overwhelming dominance of organizational silos as the primary obstacle, with 72.3% of respondents identifying this structural issue as a significant barrier to collaboration and integration. This is followed by resource constraints at 55.4% and a fundamental lack of understanding of PR's strategic value at 54.5%. What's fascinating is that when we look at the right side, the factors that respondents report drive successful integration, cultural and leadership elements clearly outrank technical or operational solutions. Nearly half of the respondents identified a shared understanding of PR's value and strong leadership support as the most critical success factors. Early involvement of PR practitioners before decisions are made rather than after ranks third at 43.8%, which directly counters the common practice that we saw earlier of bringing communications in only at implementation. So this data challenges conventional assumptions about integration. Despite resource constraints being cited as a major barrier, technical solutions and additional resources rank low as success factors. The data clearly indicates that PR integration is fundamentally a cultural challenge rather than a technical or resource-based one. What matters most is shifting organizational culture and leadership mindsets. This is further evidence that superficial structures without corresponding cultural change will fail to embed communications expertise throughout the policy process. My fourth finding reveals a fundamental contradiction in how governments approach public communications. The data shows governments recognize PR's potential to build trust and enhance public understanding, but systematically undervalue its strategic contributions to policy development. This creates what I call a democratic disconnect, where citizens are treated as passive recipients of information rather than active participants in governance. This disconnect directly reflects the tension between organizational models discussed in my literature review. Under new public management approaches, PR is positioned as a supportive service rather than a strategic partner. By relegating PR to a tactical role focused on message delivery, governments miss opportunities to leverage two-way symmetrical communication, a core principle of excellence theory that could inform better policy decisions. Despite decades of PR scholarship advocating for strategic integration, government institutions have not fully embraced a collaborative, networked approach where citizen expertise is used to enhance both policy outcomes and democratic legitimacy through meaningful co-creation. The data reveals a striking hierarchy in how respondents perceive the benefits of PR policy integration, highlighting the democratic disconnect. So the top tier benefits, indicated in yellow in the chart here, focus overwhelmingly on one-way communication. They are improved public understanding of policies and improved government transparency. These perceived benefits reflect a traditional view of PR as primarily focused on information dissemination rather than on enhancing and supporting two-way dialogue. This aligns closely with what Grunig called the public information model, a one-way approach that prioritizes explaining decisions rather than involving stakeholders in making them. The middle tier, in green, are the perceived relationship-oriented benefits of integration. On average, about 45.8% of respondents see things like enhanced stakeholder engagement, increased trust, and better anticipation of issues as a benefit of a more integrated PR function. These benefits connect directly to relationship management theory's emphasis on trust, openness, and reciprocity as essential dimensions of effective organization-public relationships. Most telling, perhaps, though, is the bottom tier, what I see as the more strategic policy benefits. These benefits, in pink, include things like improved policy outcomes, more inclusive policymaking, and more informed decision-making. And they were only cited as benefits of integration by an average of 24.5% of respondents. This disconnect illustrates how deeply the new public management principles we discussed in the Lit Review section have shaped institutional perceptions, positioning PR as a tactical support function rather than a strategic partner in governance. While excellence theory would advocate for PR's inclusion throughout the policy cycle, these findings suggest that government institutions continue to undervalue PR's potential to enhance democratic governance through meaningful citizen engagement and co-creation, precisely the collaborative approach that new public governance models champion. The democratic disconnect represents not just a missed opportunity for PR practitioners, but a fundamental limitation on government's capacity to develop responsive, citizen-centered policies that address increasingly complex public challenges. So, as we conclude, I want to acknowledge some of the key limitations of my research. So my sample had a significant imbalance, with policy professionals representing 67.9% of respondents versus only 32.1% being PR practitioners. Additionally, this research captures just a snapshot without showing the evolution of practices over time. Geographic distribution varied considerably, with smaller sample sizes in certain regions and at the municipal level, limiting my ability to make definitive claims about regional differences. But these limitations suggest valuable directions for future research, including longitudinal studies tracking PR integration over time, research incorporating citizen perspectives on engagement, comparative studies across jurisdictions to identify best practices, and studies that directly measure PR integration's impact on policy outcomes. Looking ahead, I plan to share my findings with study participants and explore publishing opportunities to address the literature gap that exists on government PR and policy development. The findings could also potentially inform curriculum development. There's a clear opportunity for specialized government PR courses at both undergraduate and graduate levels in both communications and public administration programs, and perhaps even a summer elective in the MCM program. Finally, this research has revealed intriguing questions about PR integration and democratic engagement that may form the foundation of PhD level work for me in the future. These opportunities will help ensure this research contributes meaningfully to both academic understanding and professional practice in government PR. So now for my Oscar moment. I'm incredibly fortunate to share my life. I'm gonna cry. With my husband, Guy, who has been my rock, my cheerleader, my sounding board throughout this whole journey. He's the best. And every part of my life is better because of him. I also have 3 amazing kids, Mary, Avery, and Bodie. There's a picture of them there so you can see how adorable they are. I hope that in watching me on this journey, they have learned that you are never too old. It is never too late, and you should just do it. Dr. Alex Sévigny, your thoughtful guidance and challenging conversations shaped this research in ways I couldn't have imagined at the outset. Thank you for asking the kind of questions that pushed my thinking further. Your mentorship has been invaluable. To Dr. Terry Flynn and Chair Dave Scholz, thank you for being incredible professors and for taking the time to read my paper and to participate today. Also, thank you in advance for asking questions that I know the answers to. And to my friends and family who have taken time to join the call this morning, thank you so much. I love you guys. And then finally, to the extraordinary MCM 16 cohort. Guy probably feels like he knows you all personally from how much I've talked about you. Each of you has enriched this experience in so many ways. Your insights, humor, and camaraderie have made these past 2+ years truly transformative for me. Let's get tattoos now in June. So here are the AI prompts that I used to generate a few of the images used in the presentation and the sources for the external info referenced in the presentation. And now I think I'm ready for your questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. That was very well done. Congratulations. Let's start with your advisor, Dr. Sévigny.
Great. Thank you very much. I just thought I'd kick things off by saying what a pleasure it has been to work with you. It's been a real intellectual as well as a practical journey. So just I really look forward to our meetings, and I think the proof is in the pudding. It's a fantastic piece of work that you've produced. So congratulations. My first question has to do with theory. I mean, you know, you had a limited amount of time and so many findings that you had to pick and choose, obviously, among what you, as you mentioned, but among what you did. So maybe you could ground this for us in from a public relations theory and from a government management theory. Ground your findings is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay, so as I referenced, there were kind of like 2 different components in terms of theory that I looked at. I looked at the new public management and what that approach to government organization meant in terms of how organizations were structured, how they saw communications or PR as a function within the organization, that sort of thing. And it really, I mean, we hear a lot, as a public servant, I hear a lot, oh, we have to break down the silos. We have to break down the silos, because we really do operate in these, like, with blinders on, in these silos, right? We're focused on very specific things. And this is a result of, according to the literature that I reviewed, this is a result of the application of new public management theories to our organizations. So when you layer over top of that some of the PR theories that I looked at, excellence theory, relationship management theory, there really is, like, they butt up against each other. They don't work well together at all. The principles that are core to excellence theory and relationship management theory, things like integrated decision making, two-way dialogue, making decisions that aren't just based on what's best for the organization, but that bring in the kind of thoughts, opinions, perspectives of the publics that the organization needs to deal with. When those kinds of functions, that kind of operation layered on top of the structures that we've created in governments through the application of new public management, they don't jive well together really at all. And so you get what I talked about a lot, I think, in my presentation. What you end up getting is the pushing aside of public relations. The organization doesn't see public relations or communications as a facilitator of conversation. Instead, they're very much limited to this idea of pushing out information. They're like a broadcast channel. They're the function responsible for sharing information, and there's very little recognition within those structures established through new public management of the kind of the dialogue that the function can actually support and encourage within the organization to ultimately lead to better decision making and decisions that will have positive impacts and positive outcomes for the people that they actually are affecting, right? So it was a bit of rambling. I hope I answered your question, but there we go.
No, it was good. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I agree with you. The key point is the idea of interactivity with key constituent publics and audiences just isn't built into new public management. So very interesting. That was a very interesting part of your thesis when I read it. So second question, you had the, you were cited as one of your limitations, the differential participation rates. So you have a majority of public policy people. And I was just wondering if you discovered any clues as to why that happened. Because back in my mind, I think there might be a link to the actual thesis, to your thesis. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a link. I think there's two sort of answers to that question. The first one is there are way more policy people in governments in Canada than there are comms or PR people. So just by virtue of numbers, I was probably going to get more PR or policy respondents than comms respondents. But I also think that PR and comms folks working in government, they work in an organization that sees their function as focused on pushing out information. So when they get an email that talks about this kind of, I don't know if highfalutin is the right word, but this conversation about integration with the policy process, if they've never had any experience in actually doing that, it's like a foreign concept to them, right? I think that PR and comms folks see their role, in many cases, see their role as just that pushing out of information. And the idea of integrating or trying to think about what it is that they do a little bit differently within their context is maybe something they never even thought of. And so answering survey questions about that doesn't make any sense because they have no question. I think limited response from comms folks.
Great, thank you.
Amy, I put this question in the chat, so if you want to just look at it as I read it to you, and it's a complete follow-up onto what you just talked about as well. So you talked about educational background as a significant barrier for policy development. What educational components or competencies do you believe are most critical for preparing PR practitioners or communication practitioners to effectively engage in this process?
I think it really is around that idea of, relationship management theory, stakeholder engagement, thinking about their role, not as the one way, but as the two way. And how do you, there's different levels to that, right? Practically, how do you design engagement processes that are structured in such a way as to get the best information, right? That are easy for people to engage in, that provide multiple opportunities in multiple different fora, like all the kind of more operational pieces, but also then PR comms folks need to have an understanding of what to do with that information once you have it, and how to use their voice within the organization in a way that adds value to the conversation, right? So that they are seen as holders of important information that is relevant and helpful to the decision-making process. So and I suppose that's, the more junior people have those more kind of basic approaches, and the more senior you get within the organization, the more experience you have with those things, then you kind of build up competency to be able to then translate the practical work that you're doing into more insight and strategic, value for your organization. So.
You were glitching just before I asked my question, and I was worried. So I forgot to start off by saying congratulations. This was an excellent read. I really enjoyed reading this, and it was, it's a very thorough study that has great potential, I think, to have an impact on building that bridge together. So well done. It was truly a pleasure. So second question is in the chat as well. So you talked about this PR policy integration that you developed to these 4 components. Which component do you believe would face the most resistance in implementation, and what strategies would you recommend to overcome the resistance?
Oh, Terry, of course you ask. I don't even have my thing up, and I didn't include it in my presentation. So now I have to open it on my other screen here and scroll down while I talk.
So, well, you give us 180 pages. Like I'm
Well, I didn't have enough time either to talk about. I had a whole bunch of slides developed talking about the framework, and then I didn't have time to build it in. So, okay, so the 4 components of it are strategic integration, capacity building, collaborative structures, and citizen engagement. From my perspective, I think that the strategic integration piece would be the most kind of difficult, because it really does involve changing culture, right? Changing people's understanding of what it is that PR comms is, what value they bring, how they work within the organization. I feel like without that kind of cultural change, without that leadership vision at the top, that this is how we're going to use this area, or even just this is how we're going to integrate this function, like we're going to make sure our policy folks understand these theories and principles and can apply them, right? Like just kind of, in like the real actual work of integrating it into the culture and operation of the organization, I think is probably the most challenging of the 4, just because, I mean, you can throw resources at things like capacity building, right? You can put training programs on, that's not hard. You can hire more people, that's not hard, right? Building structures, okay, we'll set up a process, that's fine. When we're doing ABC, you do it in this order, ABC. The citizen engagement piece is probably a little more complex and difficult as well, just because, I mean, in my experience anyways, with the government of the Northwest Territories, people are residents, citizens experience engagement overload, right? Like governments are constantly coming to people and saying, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And often it's things that people don't like care about really, or don't impact their lives, so they don't engage. And so finding ways to actually meaningfully talk to people, and talk to people in ways that don't burn them out, that don't turn them off the idea of engagement, will, I think, require some thinking and some kind of, deeper investigation, probably.
I have up, you can't see it, but in this top corner it says MCM Public Sector Communication elective course. So, but we're preaching to convert it. I mean, that last part you just talked about, this structural integration issue, is that course for the wrong people? Should it be in an MPA course or Masters of Public Policy course? Which, interesting enough, McMaster is launching a new executive Masters of Public Policy course based on the MCM program. So there might be integration there. Aren't those people that answer the question, aren't they the biggest barrier?
Well,
Aren't
I mean,
the-
I'm
aren't-
going to use myself as an example, right? So I'm now an ADM level within the GNWT, right? And when I was hired, my boss said to me, I've never had a comms person at this level before. I'm really interested in what this is going to be like. And I think I have at this level been able to bring a perspective on things that is incredibly valuable for my organization. And I feel like the people who go through the MCM program have that perspective and can move into those kind of senior leadership roles where they're able to actually make a difference in how their organizations value and implement these practices.
Right. That's all I have for now, this round. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Terry. So the problem of being the chair is I'd like to ask a question, but all the best ones have been asked already. So I'm going to build on Terry's. I do have a question about how do we move forward. So is it, from Terry's point, do the policy people need to have the skills that communications people have. Is that part of it, or is it, do communication people have to find a way to show their credibility by someone like you moving to an ADM level and then bringing it with it? How do you think we move forward with this from like, who needs to be the leaders pushing for reform?
I don't know about the leaders. I think it's probably comms folks, right? Trying to change, trying to not even just doing the work, but having the conversations with their coworkers about the value of conversation with stakeholders and residents, right? At a very, very basic level, not just making decisions, but asking the questions. And I've seen in the interviews, I had so many conversations with people where they were like, we get brought in at the end of the conversation when they're ready to launch this thing, and we ask a million questions that really somebody should have thought of at the beginning of the process, right? Like 3 different people in those 15 interviews used the term lipstick on a pig, right?
Yeah.
You can't, So having the kind of just groundswell, I mean, you can do lots of things top down. I can come in as an ADM and say, thou shalt all do this, right? But until you have the people who are doing the work understanding why we're doing the work in a certain way. And maybe now that I think about it and talk through it, it's both need to happen. And it needs to come from the top, it needs to come from the bottom, it needs to come from policy people. So yeah, I guess I should go out to conferences that are both policy and comms folks and start selling this idea to them.
I think that's what would be a good idea to be doing. Yeah. And it's interesting, in this program, 18 years, we've seen the credibility of PR raise, maybe not in government. Government's always the slowest to adapt, but that's what it's been all about, is how do all the representatives of the MCM program go out there and talk about the skill set. And lipstick on a pig, I wrote that down because, and it's interesting you say that. When I remember a public consultation that we were involved with, and the people at the consultation were the policy people. The ones who event managed it were the PR people.
Yeah.
And then they left, and I knew them all because of my involvement. I say, why are you leaving? It's like, well, we're not. We just come back and put lipstick on this later, is what one of them said to me. It's crazy that they weren't involved in the consultation. Yeah. So I completely agree with you there. So thank you. This was excellent. Dr. Sévigny, do you have another question?
You know what, I do, but I just want to give the gallery a chance to ask questions, because it's such an interesting topic. I'm sure people have opinions. If they don't, then I'll come back with the questions.
Okay. Anyone in the gallery? Appropriate silence.
Well, no, like they have a pack. It's like a secret pack. It's not until
It's
after
not a secret anymore.
On Rashpal's final question, then they'll have 100 questions of people. But it's like, yeah, okay.
So back to you, Alex.
Yeah. So hearing no questions. I mean, one of the things that you raised, and it's a bit of a particular point, but I having taken leaves from the university to work in the political side of government, I've experienced this. Like, to me, the best teams are the teams that work together, comms and policy, right? Under one project or towards one objective. So the challenge towards that is managerial and to a certain extent it's also cultural. So I wonder what needs to change in organizational culture for this kind of these cross-functional teams to happen. Because I mean, like in your thesis, you very interestingly asked the policy people whether they felt they had the theoretical grounding to do their thing, and there was kind of mixed results there, right? So anyways, yeah.
I think one of the things that I had a slide and then I took it out because I was cutting slides down. But I had a slide that talked about this idea of policy folks in the interviews that I did with them, policy folks really see in government, comms, PR people as generalists, right? That policy folks often work in these like narrow fields, like water regulation or, you know, like land use, like these and they're very specific, right? That you need to have an understanding of a legislative scheme and regulation, and these comms folks who are just good at putting out ads, you know, how is it that they could come in and actually understand the kind of depth of the work that we're doing in this very narrow field, right? So what happens when policy people have that perception of comms folks is that they're not invited to the meetings where they're talking about these complicated issues, not given the opportunity to learn about, you know, the regulatory scheme in Area X. And so of course they can't provide comprehensive, really good advice about when stakeholder X says this, we can pull this insight from that, because they haven't been given the opportunity to really learn the subject matter in depth, right? So it's this weird self-perpetuating kind of vicious circle where comms people recognize they need knowledge, they can't find ways to get it, so they can't demonstrate their value, but because they can't demonstrate their value, they're not invited into meetings, and so they can't develop the knowledge. Like it's a vicious circle. And I think in order to break it, you just have to, like, there has to be a decision made at some point. A director, a program director somewhere has to say, no, you know, I do recognize the value that comms folks who know what this business is can bring to the conversation. And we're going to start, as you said, working more collaboratively and closely as a team, even especially on things that aren't focused on that one-way message crafting or one-way information delivery, right? On the kind of broader, just discussions about the policy area. What are we going to do about this? I work in a shop where there's hallway conversations about topics all the time, right? That the comms person brings a different perspective to the conversation than if you had the two like legal policy folks talking about. Not that there's anything wrong with legal policy folks, but they have a different perspective, right? And they think about it from a different way. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question either. I feel like my heart rate is still racing and I'm rambling a little bit, but
No, you answered it really well. I've lived it, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
All right. So timing
last
wise,
question.
Terry, yeah, do you have time
Yeah.
for one last question?
Yep. So first of all, I was going to ask about your John Dewey quote, because it seems actually counterintuitive to today, because I think Trump could in fact say that he actually is representing the mass publics. And anyways, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to acknowledge that you had 3 little letters on your sort of future list and PhD, and I encourage you to do that, think about that, and really explore that and what that means as well. And I would, you're past the conference sort of opportunities for this year, but you know, this is a great thing for CPRS or IBC. IBC actually is having a conference in Canada in October, just for Canada. So that might be something just to sort of keep in touch about and put yourself in line for that. There's a lot of government communicators there, sector communicators as well. BledCom is also another one that get a mix of policy and give you some international perspective. But I think there's an opportunity to integrate a partnership with our Wilson College of Leadership and Civic Engagement, which is between the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and to really kind of build out this, you know, integration of government communications. I'm actually reviewing their executive masters in public policy proposal as part of a team. So I'll see what it looks like in terms of communications, but I think there's lots of opportunity there. And hopefully, if there's an opportunity, you'll put up your hand to sort of bring this expertise to bear as well. So that's all I wanted to say. No question.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Amy. And then Alex, we're going to move everyone to a
I've got everybody ready.
All right. So we're going to move it.
Yeah.
So when you get the request, please click say yes, and then we'll pull you back after we've had a chance to chat things over.